On Zombie Reddit, today's story is...
I kept my husband for 6 months and he paid me by watching me. The tracker in my car was real. My marriage is going through a difficult time and I need to know if I'm being unfair. My husband Jerry and I have been married for 4 years, and before that we dated for 2 years. During all this time together, I have always been completely faithful. Not once have I given him reason to doubt my loyalty. However, recently Jerry has been making accusations of infidelity without any real basis. Everything started to change at the beginning of this year when Jerry lost his job. During the 6 months that he was unemployed, I became the sole source of income for our household. I tried to be understanding and supportive, assuring him that everything would be all right and that he should just concentrate on finding a new job. But I could see how the situation was affecting him deeply. On several occasions he confessed to me that he felt less of a man because he wasn't contributing financially. The situation became even tenser when we went out with his childhood friends. They would make hurtful comments, joking that he was the woman in our relationship because he didn't work. Although they probably thought they were being funny, I could see the pain in Jerry's eyes. These comments hurt him deeply and made a difficult situation even worse. His pride and self-esteem seemed to crumble with each joke. Things became even more complicated when I received a promotion at work while Jerry remained unemployed. Although I was proud of this professional achievement, it seemed to only make Jerry feel worse about himself. He became increasingly isolated and showed clear signs of depression. His daily routine became monotonous. When I left for work in the morning, he was on the sofa playing video games, and when I returned in the evening, he was still in exactly the same place, controller in hand. His behavior began to seriously affect our daily life. He completely stopped helping with the housework. When I asked him to collaborate or at least clean up after himself, reminding him that he was my partner and not my mother, he immediately became defensive. His mood would change drastically in a matter of seconds. He would come up to my face in an intimidating way and start shouting like a small child having a tantrum. He would shout about how he was a man and shouldn't have to do housework like a woman. Hearing him say these things hurt me deeply because this was not the Jerry I had fallen in love with. Never before had he expressed such sexist ideas. It was as if he was channeling all his frustration and pain towards me. As time went by, Jerry's behavior became more worrying. He started to want to control every aspect of my life, especially my activities outside the home. If I was late, he bombarded me with questions demanding to know where I had been, with whom and why I had been delayed. One night, after an informal meeting with my work colleagues that went on longer than planned, I arrived home in a somewhat cheerful but good mood. I found Jerry sitting in the darkness of the living room, waiting for me. As soon as I entered, he jumped up, came towards me and snatched the phone from me. I was paralyzed with surprise. Without saying a word, he began to review all my messages and calls. I stood there, confused and hurt, trying to understand what was happening. After thoroughly checking my phone without finding anything suspicious, he began his interrogation. "Why did you arrive so late? Are you having an affair? Who are you sleeping with?" I couldn't believe the accusations coming out of his mouth. I had never given him reason to doubt me. Yet there he was, treating me like a criminal. That night, instead of relaxing after a long day, I spent hours trying to convince my husband that I wasn't being unfaithful. I explained over and over again that I had only been to an office party where nothing inappropriate had happened. I begged him to stop being so controlling and reminded him that this was not the person he used to be. I didn't understand what had awakened so much insecurity and mistrust in him. Finally, he calmed down and we were able to go to sleep. The next morning, Jerry was calmer. He apologized several times, in a soft voice full of regret. He explained to me that being at home all day gave him too much time to think, and those thoughts had become negative. He told me he didn't know how to stop them, how to control that overwhelming feeling of doubt and fear that had taken over his mind. After this incident, I suggested he seek professional help, hoping that therapy could help him process what was causing these changes. To my surprise, although with some resistance, he agreed. However, before we could schedule a session, something unexpected happened. Jerry received a job offer. It was a position he had applied for weeks before and had initially been rejected. It turned out that the person they had chosen decided not to take the job, so they contacted Jerry and offered him the position. When he got the news, Jerry was elated. His face lit up with joy and, for the first time in months, I could see a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with. I felt genuinely happy for him and hoped that this new opportunity could bring some stability and positivity back into our lives. The job offer came with one important condition: Jerry would have to move to another city. Despite the challenge this represented, I encouraged him to accept the offer. It was a good position with an attractive salary and, more than anything, I wanted him to regain his confidence and feel good about himself again. At first, Jerry hesitated. He didn't want to leave me behind and even suggested that I quit my job to move with him. I refused immediately. I wasn't willing to leave my well-paid job and the stability it provided just to follow him to another city. He tried to convince me, saying that with his new salary I wouldn't even have to work and could be a housewife. I stood firm and explained that I had no desire to stay at home. My career was important to me and my job had supported us during the difficult months when he was unemployed. It was not an easy conversation and Jerry was visibly upset. He accused me of choosing my career over him, and I honestly replied that I was. It was not a decision I took lightly, but it was one I stood by. Jerry had always known that my career was important to me and, although I loved him deeply, I was not going to sacrifice it for him. He told me he could turn down the offer and wait for another one, but I reminded him that this job was his best opportunity at the time. He had no other prospects in the pipeline. I encouraged him to take the position, suggesting that he work there for at least a year. If after that time he still didn't want to live away from me, he could always look for other options closer to home. In the end, Jerry accepted the offer, although I could tell he was still disappointed. After he moved out, to be completely honest, I felt a great relief. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I could breathe easy. Coming home after a long day at work was no longer exhausting because the house was no longer a mess. There were no more dirty dishes all over the living room and no more clothes strewn about at random. Jerry still called several times a day to see how I was, but at least I no longer had to endure the anxious interrogation if I came home an hour late. For the first time in a long time, I felt free to meet up with my friends without worrying about the accusations that would await me when I got back. It was as if I was rediscovering a part of myself that had been suffocated by all the tension and conflict of the last few months. This doesn't mean that I didn't miss him, of course I did. He is my husband, but at the same time, I felt more like myself without him constantly watching over me or questioning me. It was a strange mixture of emotions, but deep down, I hoped that this distance would be beneficial for both of us. After about a month in his new job, Jerry came to visit me. He could have come sooner, but he had been busy adjusting to his new life, settling into his role and making new friends. When he arrived, I noticed a visible change in him. He looked more relaxed, happier, more like his old self. It was a relief to see him like that. During his visit, Jerry shared stories about his new work friends. He had found a group of colleagues his own age and they had started going out at weekends, just to relax and have fun together. He spoke enthusiastically about them, commenting on how kind and helpful most of his colleagues were and how much he enjoyed working there. Hearing him talk about his new life with genuine enthusiasm filled me with hope. For the first time in a long time, Jerry seemed happy and that made me happy too. However, the happiness I felt during his visit didn't last long because shortly after he returned to his new city, things took a strange and disturbing turn. One of the first things I noticed was that, just after his visit, Jerry somehow seemed to know exactly where I was at all times, without me having told him. After work, I sometimes visit stores like Home Depot or Target, just to look around without intending to buy anything. I know it may sound strange, but walking around looking at things with no plans to buy helps me clear my mind. It's my guilty little pleasure that helps me relax after my high-pressure job. Jerry has always known about this habit of mine. But after his visit, Jerry would suddenly call me while I was in these shops asking me what I was doing at Home Depot or Target for so long. It took me completely by surprise because I hadn't told him where I was. The timing of his calls was chillingly precise. He would call me exactly when I was there. When I asked him how he knew, he would laugh and say things like, "I know you very well," or "I've been your husband long enough to read your mind." At the time, I naively accepted his explanations, thinking it was just a sign of how well he knew my routines. I even found it flattering in a way, as if he really did know me so well, and I decided to ignore that uncomfortable feeling I was feeling. I convinced myself that it was probably just a coincidence or that he was joking. I didn't question it any further. Looking back now, I can't help but see how naive I was to accept his explanations without investigating further. Something didn't feel right, but I ignored my instincts. Then, just yesterday, I went to a friend's birthday party at a restaurant, a small informal gathering to celebrate her special day. We were having a pleasant time when, suddenly, my phone rang. It was Jerry. As soon as I answered, he started shouting, his voice frantic as he accused me of being unfaithful. I was completely taken aback and asked him what he was talking about. His response shocked me. Jerry told me that he knew I had been in a restaurant for hours and that to him that could only mean one thing: I was there with another man. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. With a trembling voice, I asked him how he even knew I was at a restaurant. His response made my stomach churn. He said, "Aha, I knew it. You're cheating on me. Look, you can't be trusted. Now tell me who the man is." I was absolutely dismayed by his accusations. It wasn't just what he was saying, but how he was saying it, so convinced and so far from reality. I asked him to video call me right then and there, determined to prove that I wasn't doing anything wrong. When he did, I showed him my surroundings and the people I was with, my group of friends. I saw the anger in his face gradually fade, replaced by an expression of shame and guilt. He realized right then and there that he had jumped to the wrong conclusions and had been completely wrong. But I wasn't willing to let this go. I moved away from my group so I could talk to him. I then demanded that he explain to me how he had known that I was at the restaurant. My heart was pounding as I pressed him, warning him that if he didn't tell me the truth right then, our relationship would be over. Jerry hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, and finally confessed. He admitted that he had placed a tracking device in my car to follow my location. Upon hearing his confession about the tracking device, I felt like the world was caving in on me. He told me that he had been following my every move without my knowledge. As I processed his words, I felt such a strong feeling of nausea that I thought I was going to throw up right there and then. A tracker in my car? I couldn't understand what was happening. My husband, the man I had trusted and with whom I had shared my life for years, had done something so invasive that I found it hard to believe even after hearing it from his own mouth. With a trembling voice, I demanded an explanation. Why had he done this to me? What had I done to deserve something like this? At first, Jerry tried to defend himself by saying that the device was for my safety. According to him, he just wanted to make sure that I was okay at all times. His feeble excuse only made my anger increase. I replied sharply, telling him not to insult my intelligence with such an obvious lie. If it really was for my safety, he wouldn't be using it to accuse me of cheating on him or to question me about my every move. This wasn't protection, it was control and surveillance. It was then that Jerry finally admitted the truth. He told me that he had put the tracker in my car because he didn't want to be caught off guard in our marriage. I was speechless. Unpleasant surprises? What did he mean by that? Jerry explained to me, in a tone somewhere between defensive and pleading, that many of his new coworkers were divorced and most had been cheated on by their partners. He went on to say that listening to their stories had planted fear in his mind, making him feel more paranoid that I might do the same. He didn't want to end up like them, betrayed and taken by surprise. According to Jerry, it was perfectly normal to take these precautions, and some of his married friends even did the same, tracking their wives to protect themselves. Listening to his justification only made me feel more disgusted. The fact that he thought this behavior was normal, and worse still, that it was justified, left me speechless for a moment. I told him directly how horrified and violated I felt. I did not soften my words. I made it very clear to him that what he had done was neither normal nor acceptable. It was manipulative, invasive, and completely inappropriate. Jerry admitted, albeit reluctantly, that perhaps he had made a mistake installing the device without consulting me first. But instead of taking responsibility for his betrayal, he insisted that I shouldn't make a big deal of it now that I knew. He continued to defend himself, saying that this was something that any man in his situation could do, especially living away from his partner. His attempt at justification left me speechless. My hands were shaking as I told him that I didn't even know who he was anymore. The man on the phone, trying to make the stalking and control seem normal, was nothing like the Jerry I had married. I didn't want to burst into tears and make a scene in the restaurant, so I told him I couldn't continue this conversation. My head was spinning and I needed space to think. Jerry tried to argue further, but I couldn't bear to listen to any more excuses or justifications. I hung up. Later that night, after the party, I returned home still reeling from everything that had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the device he had hidden in my car. How could he do this to me? Where had he put it? The thought sent shivers down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and began to meticulously search every corner of my car, running my hands through every space and crevice. Finally I found it, an AirTag hidden between the seats. My heart sank as I held it in my hand. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a calculated act of surveillance. He had gone to the trouble of tracking my every move without my permission, while pretending that everything was fine between us. Since then, I've been lost, not knowing what to do. Jerry hasn't stopped calling and texting, begging me to call him so we can work things out. But every time I think about hearing his voice, I feel a mixture of disgust and anger. Am I the one who's wrong? Update 1. First, I want to thank the hundreds of Reddit users who not only commented on my post, but also sent me private messages to make sure I was okay. Since I found the AirTag in my car, Jerry has been sending me messages every day. His messages have been an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes he sincerely apologizes and other times he accuses me directly, trying to blame me. One moment he says he is sorry and wants to fix our relationship, but in the next message he blames me for causing his insecurity. He has written things like, "If you hadn't made me feel so insecure about us, it wouldn't have had to come to this." It's like he's trying to change the story to justify what he did and make me responsible for his paranoia. The most frustrating thing is that he keeps harping on the issue of infidelity. In one of his messages, he wrote that my anger about the tracker only proves that I have something to hide. According to him, if I wasn't cheating on him, I wouldn't mind him monitoring my movements. He says he just wants to feel secure in our marriage, as if his feelings justify invading my privacy and breaking my trust. Reading these messages has left me completely baffled. It seems that Jerry doesn't even understand or care how much damage he has caused me. He doesn't focus on his betrayal, but on twisting the situation to justify his need to control me even more. For all those who commented that maybe Jerry was always like that and that this year just brought out the worst in him, I think they are right. Looking back, I can see that he was always jealous. But there were boundaries that he respected. Like any couple, we had our problems, but there was mutual understanding and respect for each other's space. I thought we could overcome any obstacle if we were honest and communicated. But what is happening now feels completely different. I don't understand what happened to him, especially after he started his new job and made these new friends. He has always been somewhat possessive and insecure, but this level of obsession, control, and paranoia is too much to handle. I wonder if this new group of friends is influencing him in some way, feeding his fears and insecurities. Whatever the reason, I don't deserve to be treated like this. Update 2. Jerry came home to see me this weekend. At first, he did what he always does, try to manipulate me and present himself as the victim. He started with his usual justifications, trying to rationalize his actions. But this time I didn't let him continue. I interrupted him and told him that I had found the AirTag in my car and that I would keep it for the divorce proceedings. When I said those words, Jerry went pale and his eyes opened wide in surprise. It was as if I had hit him. He probably didn't expect me to go that far. He probably thought he could talk his way out of it with sweet nothings, but this time I didn't give him that opportunity. I told him calmly but firmly that it was all over. There was nothing he could say to repair the damage he had caused. I could no longer see him in the same way and I was not going to pretend that everything was fine. From now on, I would have to talk to my lawyer about any matter related to this situation. Jerry pleaded with me not to go ahead. He insisted that this was not grounds for divorce, that it was just a mistake, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. He was trying to regain control of the situation. He promised me that he could change if I gave him another chance, but nothing he said could change how I felt now. He tried to argue that he had no right to leave over something so insignificant. He insisted that we could talk it through and find a solution to this small problem in our marriage. His words sounded empty. As always, he was trying to minimize the seriousness of his actions, trying to convince me that this was something unimportant that we could ignore, but I wouldn't fall for that anymore. I told him without hesitation that what he had done was neither insignificant nor small. It was a serious and inappropriate violation that had made me feel completely invaded as a person. The trust in our relationship was destroyed and no conversation could fix that. I had tried to make this work for a long time, but this was not something I could easily ignore or forgive. I reminded him that, as his wife, I deserved at least basic trust. If he couldn't give me that, then there was no basis for us to continue together. I didn't want to be in a marriage where I was constantly being watched and controlled, accused of things I never did. That wasn't love. It was something completely different, something toxic. I told him that this marriage should have ended a long time ago, especially when he started to doubt me during his unemployment. At the time, I hoped that once he found job stability, things would improve. I thought that maybe the insecurity would go away and he would regain some of his self-esteem. But everything got worse. Even after he got a job, his trust issues and need for control only increased. I pointed out that during all this time, he had never been unfaithful to me. I had always been loyal and yet he treated me as if I was going to betray him at any moment. I told him he didn't deserve this treatment. Nobody does. The constant accusations, the surveillance, the interrogations, it was all too much. I had tried to be patient and understanding, but I couldn't take it anymore. He deserved better than this. At that moment, Jerry broke down in tears and fell to his knees. He begged me not to leave him, pleading for another chance to try to fix things together. His desperation was evident and it hurt me to see him like that. But despite his tears and pleas, I stood firm in my decision. I knew I couldn't go back. This was not something that could be fixed with more apologies or promises. Trust had been broken. And there was no going back. I asked him to leave the house. I told him I couldn't have him here anymore. It was difficult to say those words, to ask the person with whom I had built a life to leave. But it was necessary to regain control of my life, to begin to heal. I couldn't continue living with so much anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. Since then, I feel numb. On the one hand, I feel a deep sadness at how abruptly my relationship ended. The life I shared with Jerry, the dreams we built together, it all feels like it vanished in an instant. It's hard to accept that things ended this way. I never imagined it would end this way, but on the other hand, I feel like a huge weight has been lifted. Now that it's all over, I can finally breathe easy. It's a strange feeling, but I believe I made the right decision. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update. Jerry and I are finally divorced. After everything that happened, I never thought this day would come, but here we are. We sold the house and divided the proceeds equally. It's almost unreal to think that this chapter of my life is officially over. I am currently living at a friend's house while I look for my own apartment. For the first time in a long time, I don't have to worry about constant tension or emotional manipulation. I can focus on myself, on finding a space that feels like my own and starting over. One of the most difficult decisions I had to make after the divorce was to block Jerry. At first it was painful to cut off all communication, but it was necessary. Throughout the divorce process, Jerry did everything he could to convince me not to leave him. He would show up at my door unannounced, begging me to stay. At one point, he even told me he was thinking of hurting himself, and I offered to call the helpline for him. But he insisted that only I could make him feel better. I stood my ground, even then. Now that it's all over, I can't allow him to keep contacting me and creating more chaos. I don't hate him, but he no longer has a place in my life. I am finally free. It won't be easy, and there will surely be obstacles along the way. The pain is still present, but every day I feel stronger and more confident about the life I am building for myself.